So we have about 700 employees here in Topeka across 2 different campuses. And our job is to really overserve that high functioning financial advisor that's out there. And here inside the office, I've been with our firm for 15, going on 16 years since we launched in 2005. Yeah, so I was lucky to get in here as soon as we were opening the doors, and served as a vice president for quite a while, as a front line working with the financial advisors, and then recently transitioned into a role as chief strategy officer. So we are taking some of our concepts and the things that we do here around Advisors Excel, and through myself and my team, branching that out a little bit wider across our organization and across all of our clients. So that's a little bit about what we've got going on these days.
Yeah, man, I love it. And how many salespeople do you guys have in your organization now?
Currently on our sales floor, we're sitting at about 70 employees.
Nice. Love it. Love it. Okay. And for those 70 employees, how many would you say have been in your industry probably longer than a decade or two? And then how many would you say are more like the greenhorns?
Maybe 50-50. I would say that there's a good,
okay.
There's probably 30, 35 that are fairly veteran, that have a decade plus of tenure in here inside of our industry of working, hand to hand with those financial advisors. We're lucky that we do have a good reputation in here, Sean, where maybe some people at competing firms, we are able to garner some of those and move them to Topeka, Kansas. And then there are some people, here locally in the Kansas City or the Northeast Kansas market that are in here that might be a little bit more junior. But yeah, there's a fair amount in here, maybe 30 or 40 that have a decade of experience, and then some other ones that may be a little bit more new.
And then for the amount of time you've been in the industry, obviously you've gotten to know salespeople across different companies that also do what you do. So, feel free to apply the answer to this next question across the board, because it tends to apply all over in sales, not just your industry, but everywhere. Where do you find your senior people? We'll start there first, since I think your percentage is a little higher on that end. Where do you find senior people rely on hope just a little more than they should in their sales outreach, their processes, and their pipelines? And obviously, we know they're doing great, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't still be in business. So not to say that they're doing the poor thing, but I know for us, obviously, it's all about processes, systems, and removing hope. And I know the top sales leaders in the world, they believe that as well. So where do you see the senior people really leaning on hope, probably a little more than they should right now?
Interesting question. How the senior people maybe rely on hope a little bit too much. I can't say that I've seen that so much, or maybe they wouldn't be senior inside of our company.
Fair. All right.
So they would probably
give you some context, like pre-COVID. Yeah, absolutely. So pre-COVID, a lot of the senior salespeople, and these are the folks that have been in the industry a while, so they've identified those accounts that are really doing well for them. We find statistically they're spending more time across fewer accounts, whereas the junior folks are trying to go, a little wider to develop those accounts because they're new to the business. So we find the senior people that we've been interviewing really are relying on trying to get back to those in-person meetings as quickly as possible. And obviously we've all had to pivot virtually, you know what I mean? But I'd like to hear a little bit about, the senior people across your industry, not just in your company, but that you've seen all over the place. Where are they relying on hope probably a little more than they should?
Well, I'll speak a little bit into our firm and then take it across our industry, Sean. So, we always say you're growing or you're dying. Like, there is no treading water, right? So you're either going forward or you're going backwards. So I would say that a few of our senior people, they've matured their skill set and their conversations into more business consultancy, right? More helping people run profitable businesses across the board. And part of that is here inside our firm is we develop pod systems. So I say we have 70 salespeople, but we have 12 pods that they sit on. So there's teams in here of 4 and 5 and 6. And how we work is if somebody's good at what they do, and of course you want to keep them doing their most highly profitable activities, but also these are our senior people that need to be working with our senior clients, our senior accounts. And so somebody somewhere on the team absolutely at all times is turning over rocks, right? Whatever that takes, if it's internet mining, if it's referral marketing, if it's cold calling, if it's social media strategies, whatever it is, that someone, whether they're senior or junior at all times, we have probably 20 of our 70 people that are on the sales team that are consistently looking for new accounts day in and day out. So whether we see them as senior or junior, it might just end up going more towards somebody on the team. One or two people on the team are always looking for that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a little bit about our setup. That, we're not treading water. We're definitely growing. We're growth minded all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and we find even the folks that are growth minded. I mean, I think about the military teams that I was able to embed with. We were always trying to figure out how do we get even just a couple percentage points better. So you think about an Olympian athlete, a professional runner. They're usually not looking to shave, 5 or 10 seconds off of their time. Like they're into the 1 second, the half a second, the quarter second, the microsecond. Yeah. So if we think about across the industry right now, in the industry that you're in, given what's happened in the world and the clients that you serve, where are your folks really focused on carving down to that microsecond right now? What's top of mind for them and what they need to do to improve?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, I would say more than anything, they have a database that's loaded up full of clients and loaded up full of prospects that they've engaged with somewhere over the years. You started to bring up the conversation of COVID. Yeah, but we have a lot of advisors that we work with that have a healthy marketing budget. Healthy for live events or for radio or for television, new client acquisition. But then they stack all these names up in a database and maybe don't give them as much attention as they should. It's like, the ones who should convert, maybe the ones that don't land on a long-term drip list, an email list, or whatever that looks like. The evolution that we've seen, and maybe the answer to your question here on this, Sean, is, we talk about in our office, this short tail of marketing, what happens after a marketing campaign and then maybe the next week or two. And there's a lot of sales conversation about how to best engage the client there. And then we talk about the long tail of marketing, which is, building up a drip list. We've seen a big evolution in maybe this mid-tail marketing of what happens, if somebody engages with you and doesn't immediately convert, whether that's probably been heightened in a COVID sense, because there's a lot of things happening in a lot of people's lives. But maybe what happens there from day 30 until month 3 or month 6, and just continuing to foster those relationships inside of your database and continue to look at that database as a separate prospecting funnel and giving that more and more attention. So we've seen that as probably the biggest evolution inside of these offices, these financial advisor offices that we work with in terms of sales, is giving more honor and focus and attention to the database that they've already built up and seeing the ROI that comes out of that. So long term, out of COVID, that will be something that sticks, no doubt.
And you mentioned something a couple times, database. I'm assuming you're referring to a CRM, something like that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, so
okay, so let's talk about that because there's a lot of sales leaders. They have a CRM for their company. I even talk to a lot of sales leaders where they say, yeah, everybody on my team has a CRM. It's their own CRM. They pay for it out of pocket. They build a company, so they're basically managing their own thing. It sounds like you have a CRM that's more of an enterprise level CRM. So it's something that all your salespeople use that's tied back to the organization. Is that right?
Correct. Well, here within our firm, advisors sell and our 700 employees, absolutely. Now, there's a lot of great ones out there. We sit on an enterprise customized version of Salesforce, so they're a big one that everybody knows. So that's what we sit in, and a lot of the financial advisors that we work with, we give them an option to use Salesforce as well and customize it to their needs. So some of them use that, but if they're not using Salesforce, then plenty of them have other databases or CRMs that they reside in. And to your point, whether it's advisors excel in our team looking at something central, or each of our offices that we work with looking at something central, for sure there is a database or a CRM that those financial advisors and those consultants inside of their office are living in and working in and building those lists and fostering those lists.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're already speaking the same language that I'd speak, right? That the good salespeople live in their CRM. Now, we find a lot of challenge that salespeople have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because you've gotten to work with salespeople that maybe didn't work out with your company over the years. And my guess is, in large part, it's because they chose not to live in that CRM. And so a lot of salespeople think, the boss wants me to just enter some account notes in there, so I do the bare minimum. But what do you see the difference being in productivity between those salespeople that just do the bare minimum on the account notes and those that really manage their campaigns, the life cycles of their prospects, in that short, mid, and long tail marketing like we were talking about before? What is the difference in those two types of salespeople?
Well, what I think I found, and we all know this, if you're in sales, is results speak. However, you get those results,
Mm,
right? So in here, let's talk about our firm. We need to engage a certain amount of new clients, and then we need to take care of our existing client base. And so some people are much heavier on maybe a social side. Some are much heavier text. Some are very automated and regimented, and others aren't. But over the years, over
mm.
the last 15 years, there are very few people who have been successful inside of our firm that don't have processes built into the data that's inside their database. I just don't know how else you would do it, right? If you're just logging a couple notes, and then keeping one spreadsheet
Yeah.
outside of that, it sounds fairly archaic, and I just don't think long term
Yes.
that will work out. You've got a great database and a tool. We got to find a way to use it.
Yeah, yeah, and if you're just using an Excel sheet, I mean that's a way to manage things like you would on a notepad. But it sounds like your folks are managing these more long form, campaigns, these outreach sequences. You can't do that out of your head for sure, not at
Correct.
scale, not more than past one or two prospects, and it definitely can't be done well at scale when you have to integrate omni-channel outreach. So let's talk how you use your CRM to help direct that a little bit, because I imagine with your salespeople, even the ones that are doing well aren't just blasting emails and hoping for that 0.004% response rate. So I'd love to know how you're leveraging your CRM to make sure that your folks are crossing communication channels with email, phone, text. You mentioned that, LinkedIn, social media, maybe even video, because I know a lot of firms are doing that now as well. How does your CRM play into that?
I think we look first at the stage of a prospect and view them in those different stages before we apply the tools or the tactics, right?
Okay.
So we have to identify a qualified prospect first, and there's going to be a pool of those people out there. And we all know that if you're in selling, one of the very basic fundamental things is to continuously reach into that pool and try to pull as many of these people and key them into being qualified. Okay, now I know what portion of my pool is qualified, and then try to take as many of those into now an engaged prospect sequence. So it's like, one phase is there's this massive pool of potential leads. All right, you can go buy lists or get things out of vendors out there. So I've got this big pool. Now, second step, who's qualified? Now from qualified, who can I engage with? Who do I have an initial 20 or 30-minute conversation with and approach them with value where they're open to learning more? And then I can move them into some sort of a nurture sequence or a blitz sequence or something that happens from there, right? So it's really three phases. And then once we see people in those three ways, then we can line up the different tactics, right? So the big pool of people that we don't know if they're qualified or not, those have to be, that's a lot of email with good sales copy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, you could do some texting campaigns, but a lot of that is gray area about if you have permission to do that or not.
Right.
So there's plenty of that that's email, and then there's plenty of that that's phone work. Right. Yep. And then the more qualified you get, the more strategic you can be with maybe video emails or getting their permission to text. Or we do a lot of Sean, what we call lump email campaigns. Right. If I've got a qualified group, I'm working on this right now here inside of our office. Right now, we've identified a subsegment of about 1,500 potential people that we have identified a certain way in our database, in our CRM. We've already had an initial conversation with them. We know that these would be good prospects. We're going to be tactfully tenacious with these people. Like, we're clamped on. We're not going to let go. But every time we approach them, we're going to bring value and be tactful. And so when we do that, a couple times a year, maybe quarterly, we're going to approach them with something in the mail that you're going to giggle, because these aren't meant to be like super business building. That what they're meant to be is to get somebody's attention, right? So the very next one, it's like a $15 or $20 stomp rocket that you get at Target, like that my kids have, right? Where you stomp on them and they fly up with a little one-page sales message, something around launching the profitability of your business, right? We're going to mail that out to 1,500 people. We're going to put a lumpy campaign around it. We're going to do some email and some text and some calls to those people. And a few of those people are going to respond back. But when we call those people, Sean, now we have given ourselves permission to enter that conversation. If you're my prospect, hey, Sean, I wanted to call and make sure that you got this. Did you get it? Did the message make sense? Now we're having a two-way conversation. So, but that's not going to obviously happen to the massive pool of people. That's going to happen as we get into the pool of people that we've identified. So I hope I'm answering your question. We just view them on what stage they're in, and then we can get into the weeds a little bit more as they move along the funnel.
And so it sounds like, that group of people that you're targeting, that's a very targeted list. And so maybe if I'm in sales, I've really got to work for a while before I get to that targeted list, especially if I don't have an organization like your company behind me to help me, build that whole thing out. So if you're thinking about the salespeople right now that are out there listening that, think, I'd really love to leverage my CRM better. Maybe I have Salesforce. Maybe I've got another CRM. I know I can put account notes in there. I even know I can run campaigns like the kind that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like the salespeople really drop the ball on really maximizing their CRM, especially if their company's providing it to them? It's a tool, right? I could build a house with a saw, or I could build it with a hatchet. The saw might give me cleaner lines. But I've always had a hatchet. So how do I really begin to think about using a CRM in a better way? What advice would you give to new salespeople around that?
I would say that you need to create a default for what happens when somebody moves along your prospect phase. So the default is when I have that first good conversation and I can identify somebody as now they're no longer a blanket prospect, now they're a qualified prospect. What can my CRM do, and what do I want to happen every time? Can I set up a sequence, whether it be call reminders that hit me, right? Like reminders or tasks or whatever needs to happen in there to remind me to call or remind me to text? Or can I automate emails that come out of there? Can I automate a letter that shows up on my printer to go through? Can I spend the time to sit down and design a program one time? What does my database allow me to do to design that program one time? So then every single time that happens, somebody comes out of the pool and now I put the check mark in my CRM and this happens, that sequence can kick off. Right. Or maybe after I have the first good conversation with them, and now maybe I'm scheduled for my first face-to-face or Zoom or whatever it is meeting with them, what sequence can kick off? So I don't see enough people probably spend the time to design it right and to design the default the first time. What I see is people just daily, and they mean well, but in the hustle of it all. And then every time they hang up the call, I'm excited. I got another one. And now I got to remember the 7 steps that happen next and manually do this and manually do that, as opposed to just, being able to click it off and really have confidence in it because I spent the time to design it.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about building something like that, because I think that if nothing else, a salesperson, if they have that basic sequence after a great conversation, that they'll set themselves up for success so much better. Because like you said, otherwise I'm going to be hoping. I'm absolutely going to be hoping that this thing works out, that I remember to call them back in a week and a half when I promised, that I remember to send them that information that they asked me to go research for them about my product or service. So let's talk about that. Now, when we talk about building systems here at Bulletproof Selling, we're talking about trimming hope away from our strategy. Because obviously, if our strategy, like you said, is built on process and systems, it's going to be so much more effective for us in the long run, and results will speak for themselves. So when we talk about trimming hope, it's this acronym TRIM. So the first part of that acronym, the T, is the trigger. Now, we've talked about a couple of potential triggers for a basic outreach sequence to happen, or a follow-up sequence, I guess we're going to call this one, because it's not maybe on the initial outreach. It's I've had a good conversation. What needs to happen next? What would you advise the trigger be for that? Should it be after any type of a meeting, whether it's virtual, in-person, or phone? Should it be just for a certain type? Where would you advise salespeople start with that sequence?
I would advise that they know who they're trying to go after. Like, you start with the end in mind, right? Who do I want?
Right.
So you don't, and the newer you are, the more flexibility and leeway you have to give yourself. But the more your firm matures and grows, you need to continue to refine who you're working with. I had a conversation today with one of the founders of our firm about 15 or 16 years in, making another revision to who our core client is, right? Because you have to be able to speak to that. So then when you have that conversation with somebody, you can know if you should trigger that sequence, right? And so, at the very beginning, it could just be, depending on what business you're in, hopefully it's more than they have a pulse, or, they've got a checkbook.
They can fog a mirror.
Even if it's just a little something, yes, but I want them asking for this or thinking that or whatever it is, and then you can continue to put more and more. So then that way, whether it's you or a team that you're building out or whoever's making the initial sales calls, they can start offering value at the front of the call or at the front of the response mechanism, maybe the email, and then able to ask a couple open-ended profiling questions to then get into conversation, but to know if they're a good fit. I can tell you, in our world, again, us working with some of the higher producing independent financial advisors. On the first call, if we can get two things out, if I can figure out when they're gathering client assets, where those client assets typically go, so what sort of vehicles they're using. And then secondly, if I can figure out how they're getting in front of new clients. So how are you prospecting?
Right.
And what sort of vehicles are you using for client assets? We can start a conversation from there. And in our world, we could tell if we should trigger the first sequence, right?
Gotcha. So it's defining those questions ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And have questions ahead of time. You have to know who your target market is.
Right. If I'm just starting this off as a salesperson, then maybe it's a good idea for me to identify, if there was a bulk of people that I want to do business with that meet a certain amount of criteria. I mean, obviously, even in your world, there's these 1,500 that are a subsegment, but they still fit inside the larger umbrella of the folks that you want to serve. So as a new salesperson standing up a brand new sequence, like a follow-up sequence after a conversation, I need to know, great, if we're going to build it somewhere, we got to start somewhere. Otherwise, we can't eat the whole elephant in one bite. So identify what that larger segment is that I want to pursue. So I know it's going to apply to more often than not the conversations I'm going to have. That's my trigger. Have a couple of questions that I know these questions have to respond in these answers. Either, yes, I'm interested. Yes, I keep my data in that place. And that's a solution that my company can provide more resources around. So once I have that set, the trigger, the next part of this is making it repeatable. Now, the CRM almost handles this in and of itself because we can set up task sequences and campaigns within our CRMs that make them repeatable. So whether I launch it on one prospect or 10,000 prospects, the same 5, 7, 10 steps are going to launch. How do you recommend that your salespeople actually remember to do this, though? Because obviously I could have a conversation, hang up the phone, and it never happens, even though we've invested 20 hours and $50,000 in this beautiful sequence. How do we make sure this thing gets used?
Because there are a lot of things that can happen in a salesperson's world, as we know. So, I mean, something as simple as checklist. But what I can tell you is without the word managing is a bit of a, I don't know. I don't like the word at all. It turns me off. So, but you do have to manage this a bit, Sean. So you have to be able to say, here are the 2 metrics or the 3 metrics or the 4 metrics that as a firm we're going to look at. And the only way that we're going to be able to look at those numbers consistently is from this place that we pull them from. And I can only pull them from that place if you do X, Y, Z. Right now, I don't want to overload a bunch of things. I don't want to pull data from 8 different places. I just want very simple. Everybody agrees upon these are smart things that we all consistently should look at. And I know where I'm pulling them from. And then when they hang up the phone, the couple steps that need to happen are correlated to that. So that way we can get clean data and everybody has the right eyes on it. And we can dig there a little bit more if you want. I want to go back to one other thing as we were talking about the target market and then knowing who you want to serve to know when the sequence goes off. The only other thing I wanted to add here is you were commentating is, we want to know who we want to serve, but I also think part of knowing who to send these sequences out to and who to target needs to go into how you as a professional or you as a salesperson are differentiated in the market. And it doesn't have to be some big, shiny, great thing. I mean, it could just be that you can say that we care more because of X, Y, Z, or we take more time, or we tailor our services, or whatever it is. But I think if you can know who you're going after and who your target market is, and then you can know how you're differentiated in the market, at least how to word a couple different messages there. Now we've got where a sequence can marry up. So I can tell you the stuff that we do, we know who we're going after. We also know where we feel like we're different. We're different, and we've created separation from our competitors. And so if I can put that messaging together, now when I trigger off, okay, this is a good person to work with. Now my message that hits them shows how we separate ourselves out. So sorry, I didn't want to go past that piece.
You're good. No, that's critical.
Yeah, we were focused on who it is that we're going after, but we weren't having much focus on ourselves. On ourselves, we need to know how we're separated out, and then I can know what sort of messaging can go out of my sequence. So
absolutely, and that's actually it's beautiful you mentioned it because it's the next piece of this system building process that we're doing for our sales teams. And so we've got the trigger, we've got making it repeatable, having it inside of a CRM preloaded. The next piece is making it improvable. And so obviously, if I don't know who it is that I'm targeting, or I don't know what the unique value is, it's going to be tough for me to even, get feedback on this. I can send a sequence out, but if it doesn't generate the next step that I'm interested in, it's a wasted effort, wasted in building it, wasted in using it. So if I'm trying to make this thing improvable, how do I make sure that I am, next week, next month, taking a look at my results and figuring out, well, our first outreach step in this sequence was to respond with an email, thanking them for their time, sending them a piece of value-added content specific to the conversation. My next step was maybe a LinkedIn social media message, sharing something great, or tagging them in on something. How do I make sure that the sequence is really producing the result that I'm after post-sales conversation or post-prospect conversation?
Yeah, it goes right back to what we were saying about having the process to begin with. Because if you don't have the prospect, you have nothing to compare it against, right? If we don't have a process, if we're not in a CRM, if we don't have any of this built and we're working out of an Excel sheet and we hang up the call or we engage in that email and then we want to reach out to them, great. We'll spend the time to do it. This is somebody we want to go after. And if it doesn't work, we don't know where it fell off.
Right,
now we're chasing them on the phone again. We're emailing in and hope they respond. Or if it does work, we don't know how to do it again. Right. Yeah. I mean, we can try to piece it together, and we're almost approaching this conversation too, Sean, as if everybody is forever going to be a one-person firm. And there are plenty of people out there that might be.
Then that works. Yeah.
They can definitely do that. But if you have any idea or vision of having a second or a third administrative person or service person or marketing person or additional salesperson, they can't live in your head. So we've got to get this stuff out there. So to answer your question, if we're going to improve it, we first have to create it and then just get some very simple eyes on it. So maybe I've got a 4-step process that happens, when I engage with a prospect, great, the first time. And now if I can pull data from those 4 different points and I can get numbers, so I know from 100 of these that I had a good conversation with in the first half of the year. And then, 70 moved to this stage and 30 moved to this stage and 8 became clients. Now I can see how to improve those stages and where I've got my most potential for upside, where I can improve the most. But I don't want to overcomplicate it. I'd much rather have 3 data points or 4 data points than 12. But we can get better.
Yeah. And then even to be able to say, of the 70% that move forward out of that sequence to the right place in my pipeline, maybe they were just qualified decision makers. Now we have proposals for quotes of business out, whatever that jump is to build that bridge, to be able to figure out where in the sequence did that happen more often than not. Was it after the third touch? And what was that touch? Was it a social media message? Was it a phone call? Was it sending them a rocket in the mail? I mean, whatever that might be, right? There's a lot of different places to look at. And you mentioned something so critical. I've got to bring it back around. We're doing a lot of circle backs because this is exactly what this is supposed to be, figuring out what works, what doesn't. All of the teams that I was able to study, 24 countries, every branch of the U.S. military, there's this myth that there are all these solo operators out there, like Chuck Norris style, going behind enemy lines by themselves, just, running the whole mission on their own. And I got to be honest with you, working with Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, nobody was on their own, ever. Even if you were operating in a building by yourself, you had 10,000 people behind you, from the cooks to the truck drivers to the communications people. Everybody had a piece in allowing you to do your job as a singular person in that instance. So as salespeople, even though we're the only people on the phone call with the prospect, if we ever hope to have that team behind us, we got to treat ourselves like we should be replicating success. And you can't do that without a system. So I'm absolutely in agreement with you. So we've got the trigger. We've got making this thing repeatable. We've got making it improvable. Now the real sexy part, because this is always really where it comes down to, how do we measure whether this thing is actually producing the results that it's supposed to? So separate from improvable, where we got to figure out just how to make it better, how do we make sure this thing is even worth continuing? Because if it sucks, if it's not getting us the prospect movement forward in our pipeline, we shouldn't be doing it. We should be doing something else. So how do we measure, one, that our salespeople are using it? Because that's important. Otherwise, hey, boss, I only converted 4%. Were you using the system that we built for you? No. Well, then we really have nothing to base that metric on, right? That's just you on your own. Or so there's are salespeople using it? And the second piece is it producing the top line results that we're really in this game to achieve in client conversion, conversations, and all that? How do you recommend that salespeople begin measuring the results of their campaigns?
Start with the end in mind.
Okay.
Right. So the concept or the verbiage I've used for years is to reverse engineer it. Right. Where do I want to end up? Because you said 4%. It's funny you brought up that number.
Oh yeah.
Well, I say 4% because I've seen some campaigns recently that we've ran inside of our office that have been lower than 4%, lower than 4% conversion at the end of the funnel, that are wildly profitable, and not just profitable, but successful and engaging good long-term clients that are going to be with us for years. But we know who we're going after. We know what the profit margins look like. We know the impact that we can make on them. So if I'm starting with step 4 and knowing that, again, like who they are, what our firm's going to take to them, now I can back up into the, okay, well, if I need, I'll make up a number. If I'm out there and I'm prospecting and selling in whatever business that might be, and I want to pick up 2 new clients a month, right? Maybe then that I know if I need 2 new clients a month because they can be fairly profitable to me, that I need to get into, 10, I need 5 closing appointments, which mean I need 10 first meetings. Okay, if I need 10 first meetings, then what do I need to do to generate the 10 first meetings? And then I can back it up a couple more steps. So at the end of the day, it's backing up as opposed to starting with the campaign and then seeing what happens at the end, right? That's not going to be measurable. That's going to fall apart. But if I can start knowing what I want, we can back up into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, great way to measure it. Kind of reverse engineer with the end in mind, figuring out, because it's the science of sales. The art of sales comes in the conversation when we have that human-to-human interaction. But everything outside of that, if we're trying to do this at scale and not just have 1 client a year, we have to apply numbers. We have to apply these metrics in this science. So this is great. And we've built a cadenced outreach campaign that could be applied after any quality conversation. And we've even given metrics in how do you actually define what a quality conversation is. Are they the people that we're trying to go after? Are they answering the questions that we need answered in order to trigger the sequence that allows them to get deeper into our sales process to provide more value, to eventually turn them into people that we can serve in the long term? So great conversation, man. Thanks for helping me build that. I want to make sure salespeople actually have an opportunity to get back on the phone, get a couple calls in before the end of the day. So how do we find out more about you, about Advisors Excel? Point us to all the places we can get deeper into Matt Neuman's world.
Sure, I appreciate it. So all my handles on pretty much every social channel are Matty New, MATTYNEU. So you can find that on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. We're out there on those handles everywhere. And then Advisors Excel has a little bit different handle. There's depending on which one you're on, but it's just like it sounds: Advisors ORS and then EXCEL. So again, if anybody wants to find any of those channels, we're definitely out there and would love to engage with people. We run plenty of content and plenty of value that we put out there. Like a lot of great salespeople, it's not very pitchy, right? There's a lot of value that it gets extended out onto all those platforms to build a relationship. So if anybody wants to engage there, again, they get a lot of quality coaching and especially financial advice and financial guidance content that comes from those.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And of course, for all of the folks that are, tuning into the live stream here, thank you very much for, listening in. So make sure that you're following us at Bulletproof Selling on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for these live streams to catch the past ones we've been doing. And of course, check out the podcast that comes out of this on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and anywhere podcasts can be found. So for more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty, to help you get better processes in your pipeline, make sure you're checking out the free resources that we're constantly updating each week at www.bulletproof-selling.com. Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving you alongside Matt Neuman. Matt, let's go out there and make selling bulletproof.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sean.